today's session is really going to be focused on running through some of those more complex compound activities, and they're not really that different. It was frankly more just a way to break up the super long list of stuff into two chunks because it's really long. But it does make some sense, and we'll dive into that. And I'll run us through a quick recap of a few things from last time. Pam, I'm curious if you go into the audio things, it will give you controls for the microphone, but not so much for the speakers. There's a speaker volume button. I guess you probably can't hear me anyway, so I guess that doesn't really help. I can hear a quiet audio. There we go. Cool. Well, I'll plunge ahead, and hopefully we can, I guess the speaker. Oh, yeah. Let's see. So you've got the interactive activities on the production side, but not the sandbox. Huh.
Then can you give us your URL of your sandbox, and I'm going to.
That was adorable. Yeah, I think. No, that's very good. I think. Yeah, thanks, Bree. Yeah, Bridget was saying, yeah, if you can give us the URL for the site, Dan, we can take a look and see what needs to be fixed. Thank you. Cool. All right, got some good start of the day stuff. So, thank you, and thank you, Bree. I appreciate it. I'm going to jump in and just dive into a quick recap of some of the stuff that we covered last time, and then we'll plunge into some of these more complex, kind of more exciting activity types. Just the highlights, right? There's two different kinds of integrations available. There's the activity plugin, which is sort of the traditional integration for H5P. It allows you to go to the create an activity menu, and when you add the activity, it's the interactive content activity, and then it builds an activity that's an H5P activity inside the class. And the other integration is the newer integration that's standard in Moodle now. That is a button in the Addo HTML editor that lets you upload packages or embed H5P content from other spaces. And so those two different integrations are available currently. And then they both use a filter on the back end to allow the H5P content to show up and work mostly correctly most of the time, I guess is what I'll say. As we found out, sometimes there are types that are a little funky. They work, but sometimes a little strangely. Like that find the words activity that is fun, but it definitely has its moments of, it's not quite working right. The controls and the administrative side for either one of those two setups allows you to manage which activity types of the 40 different types there are are available to be used on the site. And then the kind of highlight in there too is that for the embedded content, when you're using the button to embed content into the HTML spaces, that doesn't include an authoring tool. So you have to author the content somewhere, somehow, and then put it in that space or link it to that space. So you could use the two integrations simultaneously to author content as an activity and then download the package and upload the package in all the places you want to use it, or link to it. I find linking internal to the site to work pretty well. It probably works better now than I think it does, because I don't do it much, because when I first started doing it, it felt like it wasn't working right. So I stopped using that so much. But it does work to grab the embed code and link in. But sometimes I think that Moodle gets tripped up in some permissioning around that, whether or not you can see the source space. So I always like to just grab the content package and move the content package in. We also took a quick look at the Lumi tool for authoring content. We'll take a look at that some more. And that's a great way to author content, save a package, and then upload the package to the site where you're going to use it. So that's my super fast recap of what we did. And I thought I'd bring this slide back to just kind of put a little framework in there. But we already said these words, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. but I want to make sure that you guys also know that these slides are in the course. And when we're done with the webinar, feel free to grab these, reuse them, jazz them up, do your thing to them, whatever it is you want to do for internal use, right? Tell your audience all about, hey, here's the way that I think you should use this tool. So that's why these are in here. I think that it's potentially very useful for you. Again, the activity, there it is in the activity menu, at least in the snap version of that menu. You can click on it, you can add it to the course wherever you need to. You could checkbox in the settings for the activity when you make it. There's a checkbox that lets you say, I want to be able to embed this content, and there's another checkbox that says I want to be able to download this content. Now, keep in mind, when you say download, people that are using the content can then grab those codes. So sometimes I will author content. Before I was using the Lumi tool, I would author content as a hidden activity in a course, use the download button as the content editor in the course, and download the package and then put it somewhere else. Essentially just using the activity as an authoring tool for H5P rather than going to the h5p.org site and putting my stuff up there. I didn't really talk about that too much, but you can author the content up in their space. We're moving to a sort of commercial model where they're going to start, where they've got a kind of a pricing tiers of, you could do things for free up there, but it's sort of limited, and whatever you build has to be shared with everyone else, which is fine if that's fine by you. But it is a restraint on how you can use their stuff, or you can pay for a commercial license in their space and then do all the stuff and have all the controls over how the content is shared or not shared. And so I didn't really talk about that too much because I feel like it gets kind of complicated. And one of the advantages of the way that this integration in Moodle works is that it bypasses that whole sort of collection of trouble by letting you author the content directly in the platform. There's the button showing up in the HTML editor. If you don't see that button, it's either because you're not using the Addo editor. Oops, sorry. Let's head backwards one. Oh goodness, I can't do backwards buttons. There we go. If you're not using the Atto editor, it won't show up. So if you're using TinyMCE, it's not going to be there. And the other alternative is that you've got the Atto editor in use, but the button's not in the bar. I'll take a quick tour of showing you how to add the button to the HTML editor if it isn't there already. It should just be there, but if for whatever reason it's not there, I'll show you how to add that there. And it's really easy and straightforward once it shows up. If you're still using the TinyMCE editor, this is another push to say, hey, maybe you should stop using that one of these days. It's not really supported anymore, and it's picking up more and more bugs as time goes on. So, eventually, you'll need to be off of that thing entirely. That could be a whole other super long conversation, of course. So we'll bypass that. And the Lumi tool, we talked about that. And I just wanted to make sure that those slides were in there for reference. So we got something to work from if you want to borrow these slides. So we talked last time about the kind of large collection of question types and information types and some of the more simple, straightforward content types. There's a few that are more complex or compound types, and I call the compound is ones that really work primarily by leveraging the other types inside of themselves. So it's sort of building on top of the existing types like questions, for example. And today's focus is on those other sort of more complex things, the complex and compound ones. So complex, and this is a very arbitrary line I've drawn in the sand here, just to break up content more than anything. But these complex types are ones that they're not as straightforward to deploy maybe, and they have layers within them. But they're not leveraging a lot of other sort of compound behaviors. And so the timeline is one of the ones I think of for this. It does have some very specific use cases, and we'll talk about some ways to use the timeline tool. And there's also the card types. Oh, cool. Thanks, Bree. So the card types are really, I think most of us think about the card types in use with language and language training, because that's kind of their classic deployment is, put a picture on a front of a card and then the word for the thing in English, and then you flip the card and learn the word in, whatever language you're trying to train in. But it actually has broader use than that. I think but it tends to be focused on the same kind of idea, terms and terminology, concept, reinforcement. So these ones I think of as really strong reinforcer behaviors, right? You're trying to come up with an alternative way to present content besides the text that you've used already to present that concept. So it gives you that sort of reinforcement, alternative path to learning, layering of the learning experience. It's all part of the universal design for learning approach to things. I think, I don't know, I've sort of find it easy to be a bit dismissive of them, but actually the more I think about them, the more I think of ways that I could use them. Even down to using cards to present formulas, right? Like I spent a lot of time in physics. Formula memorization is one of those things that a lot of people did. I, of course, was the weirdo because I wound up in math that would sit there and derive things when I didn't know a formula. But that's why I wound up in math. And but there's a lot of opportunity to build that kind of same sort of reinforcement idea in there. So look at that. I gave away my sort of thought experiment that I wanted to lay out in the beginning already. This is really just more of a thinking experiment, right? You've got a lot of formulas and memorization in a course. you want to find ways for learners to practice when to use which formula, but keep things a little more interesting than just what the text presents. How do you manage that? And I mean, it's already given it away, um, but dialogue cards might be a nice choice, right? So a dialogue card presents content um, on the front and then asks you a question about it, and then you turn the card over to validate the answer. Um, and so it gives you an opportunity to say, here's a presentation of a situation. What formula would you use to calculate, what you're doing here? Boop, turn it over, and you validate that that's the formula, right? Group concepts, create the cards based on those concepts. You might even pull up some graphical displays of information to reinforce the math behind the concept and the formula. And you make cards for them. An alternative approach would be to do a flashcard. The distinction between a flashcard and a dialogue card is that a flashcard presents the information on the front of the card, leaves you a blank on the card, and you put in a response and check that response against what's on the other side. And so it's a step more in complexity, but it's a step higher in self-evaluation, right? Rather than being up to me to judge whether or not I guessed the right answer before I turned over the card, I actually have to commit to an answer and then check to see whether that answer was correct. Does that make sense as an approach? Hopefully that does, but you never know. Sometimes these things are a little goofy. I'll tell you what, let's take a quick look at a couple of those ideas. You know what? I did not want to go to that section. Sorry. I'm going to grab the interactive content builder here inside the activity type. We'll switch to alphabetical. And if we look at the dialogue cards really quick, we can take a look at the pictures on them in this example, but I'm going to launch the content demo itself. Right, so here it's giving me an image and the Spanish for blueberries. I can check, right? Make sure that I understood what I was getting there, right? So I'm just turning cards, confirming information that's being presented on the card that hopefully I understand. But as you can see, I can also just kind of fling through these without actually pausing long enough to challenge myself to see if I do know the answer. So that's where instead of the dialogue card, the flashcard can kind of come into play. So if I head back here to, where did my flashcards go? They're there. It's like alphabetical. Wait, what? So a flashcard instead presents a really similar experience, right? This card experience, but it asks me to commit to an answer before I check that answer and knowledge, right? So it's a slightly more of an assessment moment, right? Presentation of information versus assessing understanding of the information. And those are, right, they're slightly different learning goals, right? Each one has its place, but if I put in the wrong answer, get a little feedback. And when we author these, you can actually customize the feedback, customize what kind of hints you might be providing even. I'm just going to be terrible at berries today, but that's okay. I don't know if it's a sour fruit, but oh, it doesn't like me. See? There we go. And then I can see my results. So again, right, it feels more like an assessment across the board. One of the things I enjoy about the flashcards is that it definitely has a more mm, flashy, cool feel to it. Um, and it also, I like the opportunity for self-assessment, even though I may or may not put this as a grade in a grade book. It challenges me a little bit harder than the dialogue card does. But the dialogue card is a really great way to give students an opportunity to just self-assess and check against an experience. Um, and so I think it has a lot of value in reinforcement, whereas the flashcard feels a little bit more like an assessment. Um, yeah. Any questions about that? I feel like I'm just kind of breezing through that information pretty quick, but I don't think it's super complex either. All right. I'm going to run that update while I'm pausing for a moment. All right. Well, let's hop back in. Ta-da! All right. I didn't really dive into the timeline there. I'm sorry. I skipped over it a bit. Timelines have. Uh, let's take a look at a timeline and let's think about what they behave like. Um, Timelines are a bit funny, but I think they're pretty cool. Uh, but they are a bit of a right. It's a presentation of information in a sequence of time or a series of time. The classic example that H5P has is this history of strawberries timeline where they pulled stuff from Wikipedia, right? And so there's all the licensing and reference information that is good to put in there when you're borrowing other people's stuff. Citing open source sources is always a good call. Um, it's a way to build up information in this kind of timeline approach. It obviously kind of seems like it lends itself towards things that involve history, right? Sequence of things happening in time. But that's not necessarily the limits of it. You could think about ways to use the same kind of tool for approaches to chemical reactions or other physical processes that take place over time, with each of the steps in that process occupying a marker on the timeline. It presents a way to give learners kind of a vision of that sequential event happening in this sequential layout. Um, so it does kind of have some sort of odd but interesting applications out there where the timeline can really, again, present to learners an alternative approach to that experience and give them an opportunity to kind of come at the information in a fresh new way. So timelines, I think there's perhaps a narrow band of application for them, but but they are useful for the things they're useful for. So there you have it. Um, Compound types are they're a set of tools that build on other tools in essence. They collect other bits into them and create a more robust sort of approach using multiple items. Branching scenarios are brand new in the system. I think they're still marked as beta in there. That's sort of a newer addition to the set. Course presentations, interactive books and videos. Interactive book is relatively new in the collection as well, and it's essentially it feels like the book module with questions in it. So you could build a book in Moodle and add questions to it, or you could build an interactive book in H5P. sort of have either approach. I think the interactive book feels a lot like the lesson module in some ways, but branching scenario is even more so like the lesson module. We'll take a dive into those and get a feel for them. And then interactive video is kind of the splashy one that everybody got excited about when it first came around. And it's really just about creating touch points in videos, right? It feels both the course presentation and the interactive video both felt very connected to what a classic SCORM package felt like of old, if you're familiar with SCORM. It's just a packaging or containering of content with questions and extra information layers. But it's a pretty good approach overall. The quiz sets, there's a question set and an arithmetic question set. It's just a focused set of questions on arithmetic testing. Are really ways to build an alternative to a quiz, a collection of questions, and so on. There are reasons to use those, but you're not going to get the same analytics out of them that you're going to get out of a quiz inside of Moodle. So I don't think it's a complete replacement for it. I'm looking down the pipeline for a future release of Moodle where they're going to have a titration into the quiz tool in Moodle with the questions from H5P, and then we should be able to really have a kind of good hybrid of both of those things. And then there's a questionnaire tool to create a questionnaire in the system, so less assessing and more asking. Again, there is a questionnaire module in Moodle that does pretty much all the things that this one would do plus more. So, there may be some value there for you, but it's not one I tend to think of as having a high payoff. Pam, for the video, you can. Let's see. Can the video you use for an interactive video include a video with your own audio as part of the video? Oh, to like overdub the audio? You'd have to package it with the overdubbing of audio as a new video file. It's not super hard to do, but you got to have a little bit of a specialized tool set for that usually. I think Windows has a decent tool now finally as well. So most of you should be able to get your hands on a basic tool that will allow you to overlay a fresh audio track over a video. Is that what you were asking? I'll take that as yes. But feel free to come back with more questions. Oh yeah, that's a good tool to use. And then I've used Captivate as well, and then some of the operating system tools, Windows and Mac OS. Pretty deep, but they're not as good. So yeah. And we'll dive into that maybe a little deeper when we get into the making video activities. I started off with the course presentations as the place to jump in, kind of dive into the weeds a bit. Course presentations, I mean, the obvious connection is slides, right? If I got a set of slides, course presentation feels like a set of slides with stuff on it. It's an easy connect, right? But it isn't just for those slide deck files. Any document that you've got where students move through content in the document can be redesigned as a course presentation instead. That course presentation, I mean, just in its raw form, it just gives you a way to present the material in a slightly different way. One way to think of it is if I give you a PowerPoint or a Word doc or even a PDF, you have to load some kind of reader on your device that lets you read the document. And with the presentation approach, just sort of like the same story with using the book module in Moodle, it gives you the ability to create that content in a way that the learner can access without that specialized reader tool on their device. It makes it a little more accessible to everybody that way. But it also offers you an opportunity to kind of spice things up with touch points, pop outs, extra information. And so it's not just about questions. It can be creating hotspots on the background image, or creating a video pop out inside of the slide where you get to a spot and then there's a short video that provides sort of supporting information to the user as well. I think that always feels cool to people. I don't know that I think it necessarily makes most sense, but there's certainly scenarios where I think it makes plenty of sense to do that. And then, of course, you can always add a summative event at the end of the slide deck where we're assessing what you learned, right? You could use the summative question or the summary question type at the end, or you can use any combination of question types in a sequence at the end to kind of help learners evaluate whether or not they got the right information out of what they're doing. You can sprinkle those throughout, or you can collect them all for the end. It's up to you. I tend to think of, if I'm presenting lots of material, lots of different slides, covering lots of territory, I tend to think of segmenting up that checkpoint into spots within the slides versus saving it all up for the end. When it's a pretty straightforward approach and we're only moving through a handful of slides, then it's easy enough to, and it makes plenty of sense to let the sort of flow continue until we get to that checkpoint at the end. And now we're going to test that knowledge. So but what's great is that the tool supports all of that. Course presentations, just to run through some of it, when we build this kind of content, there's an update available for that one too. We'll grab that update. I'm in as an administrator, so I get access to all of this extra updating stuff, by the way. Your faculty won't have the ability to push for updates back here the same way. Oh, it's thinking so hard about updating. Sorry about that. Maybe I shouldn't have pushed update. But let's launch the content demo. So this version of the demo content includes, right, there's jump links in it to allow me to jump to anchor points within the slides, so I can leapfrog past slides to other slides that matter to me. It's not exactly branching, but it does give me a way to reroute my experience. And then it has some questions to assess. Whether or not I read the words on the other side. Ooh, look at that. Good at guessing today. So that provided, a multi-question assessment point right after the presentation of some information. And then if I hop through, I can do these extra questions. I can learn more information. I think this one just has questions embedded in it. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward for the learner that way. But it gives me a summary at the end that shows me all the different question sets and how I performed against them, what my score looks like, and gives me an opportunity to grab my solutions, right? So I got things wrong, show me what the right answers were. Because this one in particular is all about supporting my understanding rather than testing whether or not I got the right answers. And there are a couple of different examples in here, and this is a great source of information and approaches for how to kind of think about how these things work. Um, I think the examples provide a pretty rich layer of options and possibilities. So yeah, I like it. Um, Feel free to browse these and borrow ideas. Ta-da! I did great on that one. So so there you go. The Oh, and by the way, I mentioned the download and embed codes. Here's the download button, this reuse icon showing up on this content. And here's the embed code on that content. The reuse lets you download the H5P package for this object, and then you can upload that somewhere else. It's a nice way to start off building content if you're just kind of experimenting with content, you're not really sure what to build. Check out one of the examples, download the example, upload it into either this space, right? I can choose upload here and put the package in, or in the Atto editor button space, and then you can play with it and kind of experiment with it. You can use it in the Lumi tool as well, and inside the Lumi tool, you can use that uploaded content and then redesign it for your own purpose, especially with stuff like the timeline tool. I like borrowing their package and using that scaffolding as the place to start rather than kind of staring at the blank page, if you will. There's my update. So if I choose to use this course presentation module and it's blank there, it starts me off with essentially an empty space, right? I'm going to build some slides. I can start by creating a color fill on my background. Going to go with maybe Open LMS orange. And I can choose whether that background or this approach is going to be a template, so applied to all new slides as well, or just for this slide that I'm creating. You can also upload images to be the background space. Keep in mind, right, color contrast ratios, things like that when you do these. But it's a nice, easy way to set things up. And the template behavior makes it so that every new slide that I make picks up the same behavior. So if I add another slide, it picks up that same background. And then if I wanted to, say, change this slide, it doesn't want it to have that background, but a different background color, then I could just modify this one in particular. So now these two slides have different background color than this one. Likewise with images, you can, the template makes life easy because I used to do cloning an awful lot. So I'd create a template of sorts and then just copy it over and over again until I was done with it. But what's cool here is that you could also set up text and other elements on the page, like logos, for example, text and logos on there, and then use that as your template, if you will, and clone that page multiple times. It is not Ally compatible in the sense that it's not going to come in and create alternatives. So it's not, yeah, it's not super friendly with Ally. That would be a good one to talk with the Ally team about. It would be easy enough for them to extend what they do to chase down that content. Right now, Ally tends to think of that as an external content object and not internal. Oh, the update button. It should be there only if the packages need updating. So, Aaron, if your H5P got recently installed on the site, it's probably fully up to date. Yeah. Oh, they all say update. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right, actually. So, The update button is going to give you you know what, in this space with the update available, when you go to the details page, that's when you get the button to push update. Does that make sense? Now I've finally figured out what you were saying. Okay. I was like, wait, where is that? That's where it is. So let's take a look at just a little bit more on building the slides. I mean, we could go into this forever, to be honest, but I just wanted to touch on a few things because it gives an easy way to kind of manage some of this stuff. If we, well, let's think about a video. I can add a video to the space. I can add the video directly in the space, or I can add the video as a button on the page. So I'm going to give this a really goofy name, just put it in there. So one behavior is to add that video content just directly to the page, right? There it is. That's how it shows up. It's part of the slide itself. The other option is to, in the display settings, say show it as a button instead. And now it's an icon to be clicked on the page rather than displaying itself opened up. And then when the user gets to the button, they click on the button and the button expands and shows the video. All of the items that you can add in here, text, images, you know, the questions, all of that, more or less, they will all follow the same pattern, where you can either have them display directly on the page or as a button on the page, or a link on the page in some cases. But it's a pretty easy control set. And for the course presentations, the logic in them is a little bit simpler. So it requires a little bit less work than the video content does, as far as mapping things out, because each slide is a static snapshot in the sequence, right? It's not a moving series of events like a video. So sometimes I think it's easier to start working with the course presentation and then move up to the video, because the video adds that extra layer of complexity of the meter of time is moving continuously in the background behind you, whereas the slides are single frames of time, and you don't have to deal with the sort of span that they're moving between. So again, just to show you the example, and you can see the example in those lessons that we did with the H5P.org examples. You can see you can put the question on the page in a window, in a frame on the slide page, or you can change it to be a button that gets displayed that the user clicks on to open up that frame of information. It really depends on how much stuff's going on the page, right? If you want to target a specific element on the page. One way to use those buttons also is to create extra layers of text or extra layers of video that reinforce concepts that are printed out on the page or shown. You might have a graph that shows something, and then you can have touch points on the graph that can be opened up that explain more information. I think Pam was using an example of a dashboard display inside the system with text elements that explained what that piece of the dashboard was showing you. That's a really great way to use these tools, is to draw people's attention to those objects, right? Make the connections. And so overall, again, I think once you get in there and play with it, it flows really simply. It makes a lot of sense. It's easy to manage. You can keep saving these over and over. You can build it here in the activity, or you can build it in the Lumi tool. Either spot makes plenty of sense and is easy enough to manage. I think it's pretty straightforward. Any questions about the course presentation in particular? It's pretty simple, but there could be loads of questions that come up later, so that's fine. I'll dive in a little further otherwise. On to interactive videos. Interactive videos, I think, in reality, feel very much like the course presentation, but just with the sequence, right? So it plays itself. There's times metering in there. You can use videos that you create and save, or you can grab videos from sources that you've got access to. When you do the assignment for this section, you feel free to grab videos from our YouTube channel, for example, and you can just overlay information on top of those if you want. You can do whatever you would like with that. But overall, it's a great way to add extra information to the context of what's happening in the video. I think of it in terms of like reinforcing layers. So information that some users might need access to, but it's not worth bogging down all of the experience presenting that information. So you give users an opportunity to drill in for more information about something. You could, create that sort of barbershop mirror experience where you nest videos inside the video to explain some of the things that are happening in there. You can really have a lot of fun with it, I suppose, in that sense. But it's a way to add extra layers of information and context to that experience, and give users the ability to kind of dive in there. Some sources of videos have, or I guess each source of videos has slightly different support for things like closed captioning and text files that get attached to the video for screen readers or that experience. They're all a little bit different in that sense. Yeah, Dan, that's a good question. So the and yes, there are a lot of them that don't allow any kind of nesting. These complex ones in particular are focused on kind of creating that nesting experience. That's part of why I kind of picked the compound items. That's why I picked the name compound for them, was that these are the ones that really lend themselves and are designed with the intention of having that nesting to them. And the others, not so much. And you're right. So you can't really embed a question into an accordion because the accordion just doesn't really think about it. But what I've done is created the accordion and then had a question underneath it on the page. And that works fine. It's it's not quite the experience I was hoping for. I think much like you're probably feeling, but it's good enough. Another option on that is to create a sequence of pages where there's an accordion and then the next page is the same accordion with a question underneath it. I don't like that as much, but some people feel like that gives them what they're looking for out of the experience. That's fine by me. Some people eat vanilla ice cream. I don't know. Like I don't. I mean, really. Never met an ice cream I didn't eat. The interactive videos, I think of, there's also an approach in there where you can think of them as kind of replacing SCORM content. Again, if you're familiar with SCORM, that has some meaning to you. If you don't know what SCORM is, don't worry about it too much. But it's a way of packaging the content with kind of mandatory assessment points in the content, right? So the video plays to a certain point and stops, asks me a question, a series of questions based on the scenario presented, and then either starts up or fast forwards to a point in the video and starts there, or rewinds to the place where you should have got that information but apparently didn't, and makes you watch it again. Um, so, so with those sort of like heavier handed controls added to the experience that really make it a structured learning module as opposed to a kind of more free-form learning experience, if you will. There's value in those, and I think they make a lot of sense for a lot of presentations. I don't think that everybody necessarily needs to go down that path, but it sure works. I put a note in here about the summary question at the end. Let's take a look at that experience and talk about how that works. Because in fact, H5P has made things a little bit easier for you in that sense. Let's see. Okay. Silly man. There we go. So here in my little Lumi, I have a H5P video that has, you can see a couple of markers that provide a little bit of text in there. And you'll notice, right, I have a little pop-up that'll come here. When I open the pop-up, it pauses the video so that I can read the text in there. I'll put a little note in there. One of these days we should remove the blackboard from the OpenLMS on those videos. But it's all right. The information's all the same. And so here's a couple of touch points that come up. Again, it's all about adding the opportunity to provide reinforcing information, right? Extra details that maybe the talk track, the audio, or the text that are going with the captioning are maybe not necessarily providing those elements, but that's okay because I can inject those elements in here. They can be, these textual callouts. They can be images. I could put a graph in there or something. They can be videos inside the video that provide extra video information. However we want to work that. Or they can be questions that reinforce the learning, right? And in this scenario, I think, I know this video is pretty short anyway, but I added a question to one of these where, I can assess whether or not I got that question right. And then poof, yay, it worked. And again, I got those markers that I can jump to. So there's a summary dialogue that comes with the videos now. So when I wrote that slide, I was thinking about how, oh yeah, that's the question type I'd like to put at the end of them. And now actually the summary page behaves like a summary question, which I sort of felt like was my duh moment. But, but it's already baked in there and it allows you to ask these summary statements and say, hey, so what are these things, choose some correct statements about these things. You can have one question like I've got here, you can add multiple questions in there and have them page through the summary statements about the information that they've been presented. What's cool is then that summary really gives me the understanding of what I did. Here's how things worked out for me. And I can submit answers and now I'm done, right? This could be an assessment that goes into the grade book at the end of this because I've done all that, or at the very least, all of this feeds my completion flag behavior so that I know that this video is going to count itself as completed because it has that summary moment at the end that that acts as the trigger for the completion flag. Editing view, I don't know. I think it's pretty straightforward on how to build these, but it does have a wizard that pops up the first time you come in here when you're building a new session, a new video. It like walks you through some of the elements, gives you some tips and advice. You grab a video. I pulled a YouTube link. You can set the copyright information so that things make sense. And text tracks can be added, except YouTube videos don't support that behavior. But you'll notice we go back to the view in here, the captioning that comes with the video is still available, right? So I'm not losing the captioning. I don't have the ability to override the captioning from YouTube with different captioning, if that makes sense. Um, and you'll find each video source kind of has its own behavior around that, and it'll coach you along the way about that behavior. Yeah, it's pretty good. So you've chosen a video source, whether it's to upload a MP4 file or grab an external streaming source, whatever it is. The next step is to add those interaction elements. When you build the interaction elements, you're just putting them on the screen. You can choose, again, to have them expanded as a poster or listed as a button, and provide the information directly in there. I can add multiple questions, create a sequence of questions within that experience, or just have the single question that I've created, and then choose to manage some of the settings. Right? Is there a retry? Do I show the solution? What score do you have to get to pass? Kind of all of those behavior type of settings are available in there, as well as giving directed feedback, right? So if people get it right, I can give them one answer. If they get it wrong, they get a different answer, and so on. I think it's really not too difficult. One note I'll make on these is that when you choose the spot to put the content object on the video, it picks the time on the time track that the video is currently paused at. Invariably, it picks like some down to the thousandth of a second moment to fire off at, and you can trim those off or leave them on, whatever you want to do. And it always picks 10 seconds as its default span of time, and you can wiggle that around to fit your needs. Whether you want to have it pause for longer, or you want to have that button show up for longer, rather, or you want to have that button show up for less time. It's up to you. You can move these around on the page, just like we did in the others. It's up to you how you want to put them somewhere. And you know what? This layout actually lends itself pretty good to the poster approach. So I'm just going to switch this to that view and see about expanding that out. Cover up a whole bunch of the screen because I made these long text posts in there. We'll do that. We'll say, yeah, let's try that out instead because I think that's fantastic. Let's go to view. I'm going to leapfrog over to there, and there you go. That's what it looks like. So woohoo! And so here we go. It hits that, and it's going to pause. Oh, no. It's got it wrong. And it fires off again. You'll notice I specified a line for that thing to show up, but with the poster, right, it sort of ignored that end time for the thing because the button has a when to appear and when to disappear, and the poster just has a when to appear behavior because it pauses when it appears. You do the thing, and then as soon as you do the thing, it unpauses and continues to play. I had mentioned also, let's see, it's got the display time up here, right? But it ignores that piece of the setting when it's a poster as opposed to those. I'd mentioned some other complicated behavior that we can do in here. So there is a way to manage what happens adaptivity. Man, that is a word that I do not like. There's a way to manage the behavior of what happens when they get good answers or bad answers on these. The granularity is not super deep, right? Did they get them all right, or did they get something wrong? But that's okay. That's easy enough to work around. But what we can do here is we can send the user to a particular point in the video, so that we leap them backwards or forwards to some spot where there's a pertinent information that they need to consume. Apparently, I can also let them choose to say, nah, I don't need to go back and rewatch that. It's up to you to allow or not allow that behavior. So you could say, when you get those questions right, I'm going to leap you to a section of the video forward, and we're going to just bypass some content potentially. Or when you get things wrong, I'm going to send you to a particular spot in the video to watch that instead. So you could create a question that essentially allows people to test out, right? You could say, well, let's ask you some questions up front. Your answers are those. Fast forward you to the end of the video, do the summary, and you're done. Or you can think of it as the other way, as you got something wrong. I'm going to send you to the spot to watch the thing that you should have understood in the first place, and force you to rewatch that. The third option in here is the require full score before proceeding. So in the example that I did, I got an answer wrong, and it just moved forward. But I could instead say, you're going to sit on this question until you get it right before we advance the video again. Again, these are kind of that more heavy-handed scenario building experiences inside the video, but it also offers you the opportunity to really deeply control the flow of the experience for the user and give them that opportunity to make sure that they get the proper understanding of what they're supposed to get out of what we just covered before we move on to the next section. So it's kind of cool. Aaron, that's a really good question. I think personally, I like building in Lumi because it gives me an easy way to just save those packages, right? Here's my little save button. And have that package able to then be imported to anything that I want to reuse it in. Because I'm thinking about reusable content a lot and building scaffolded content in that way. There are some disadvantages to using a tool like Lumi. Yeah, let's think about. So if I go into Lumi here and choose the branching scenario editor, right? It's really super flaky in this. The beta is really beta-y inside of Lumi, and in fact, it's not the right place to build these because it won't save them correctly. It'll throw some crazy errors or barf out or something. But I think it's a bit of a personal preference moment more than anything. You can build it online, you can build it on a desktop, doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think that's most of what I'll say. But the online tool tends to have better, it tends to function better across the board for those new things, the beta type of releases. And you'll notice they send out updates for the H5P libraries constantly. And so Lumi, I feel like, not quite as good with those updates as the built-in Moodle piece. Yeah, and there you go, Josh. So and I was showing it off a little bit in there in the user experience. When I want to view something that I'm building in here, I just switch panes. and kapow, I'm viewing it. So it's really nice to be able to test what I'm creating as I go along, because I don't have to save it and then preview it, and then go open it, up for editing and then check it out and save it and open it up for editing and check it out and save it. That's a great point, Josh. Thanks. Um, they do survive backup and restore and course imports. There's occasionally I've run into a course that has some old H5P content object in it that seems to bog down the backup and restore process as it kind of chunks its way through that content object. Um, I don't really know why necessarily that is. I suspect that that specific content object is using some old version of library, or it's using some old way of interacting with the logs that's creating a problem. And it only comes up for stuff that I built like, 3.5 years ago. Um, so probably I should just go throw those away and build new ones of those. but yeah, yeah. But by and large, your expectation should be that they back up correctly, that they restore correctly, that the log information is correct in them, because that should be the way that's going to work. And again, when I'm looking at the content that I built recently this year in H5P in the backup and restores, everything's fine. So yeah. Any other questions before I jump into branching scenarios? All right. We can fire them in there anyway. It's okay. Yeah, pausing. Yeah, I, that overlay drives me insane. And I've run into the same problem because there are ways in the embed code from a YouTube video to turn off those features, even though YouTube really wants to make it hard to figure out how to do that sometimes. Um, but uh, but that doesn't work for loading it into H5P. I tend to pull content more from stuff like Vimeo. I'll save stuff up on a Vimeo account, or like Kaltura, and stream it out, or just upload the MP4 into the content package. Um, yeah, it's yeah. But if you own the video, you can turn off that behavior in the video that you control on YouTube, um, in the settings on that video. And that's, yeah. So I guess super long version of it all, right? If you were borrowing our videos, you're going to get kind of stuck with the, you know, what to watch next bar and things like that. But if you're using your own YouTube videos, you should be able to turn off in the settings of the video content the behavior like what to watch next, and the ending screen where it gives you tiles of things to choose and things like that. But you also then have control over the captioning, because right, for YouTube specifically, you have to use YouTube's captioning in the YouTube player to see the captioning show up. So it's kind of cool because you get their auto captioning service, but you can't create your own override locally. So yeah, videos are all sorts of fun. We could go into that forever. But anyway, branching scenarios is one of the ones I wanted to cover. It's new. It does not work terribly well in Lumi, or I have not been able to figure out the condition set in Lumi in which it definitely always works or sometimes doesn't want to work. I don't know. Uh, The upside, though, is that I feel like the user experience in building it is sufficiently cool that I don't wind up doing that thing that Josh had mentioned about needing to view what I've done and then go back to editing and then view and then go back to editing, because it has this really cool layout. It's a lot like the lesson module, but I think aspirationally where the lesson module should be as far as the way that you design things. So it gives you a drag and drop space, and you work through mapping out the branching in the interface rather than having to like build links on pages and think about which link goes to where. Usually when I give a presentation about using the lesson module, I always have a whole section in there where I talk about how I use like Visio or mind maps or one of those kind of mapping tools to build out the branching paths that I want in a lesson, to map them all out and build and see the pages and the questions and the linkages between pages, so that it all makes sense for me. Um, and what's cool with the branching scenario is that I don't have to do that because the tool includes the mapping of the content and the layers and the branches, and it builds it out for me. And then I save it and it does the thing that I mapped out. It's really quite excellent in that sense. So I'm going to drop out of that and, oh, dare I use Lumi? Yeah, let's take a look at Lumi for that. Oh, wait. Right, I have to close you to get back to you to choose, oops, branching scenario. So with the branching scenario, you get a workspace, um, and you add content into the workspace. So you might grab a piece of text and say, start here, and I could add some text in here. I'm just going to keep this pretty light and simple in here, but you might build that and then say, I want to create a branching question. Um, I'm just going to give 2 branches. You can add more branches, right? You just keep adding options, and so on. But what's cool, right? I built a question, told it how many branches it wants. It gives me 2 branches, branch A1, A2, right? And then I can come in and create content here. I'm actually going to be super lazy and I'm not going to build the content yet. I love that I don't actually have to build the content all the way. And I can keep dragging those guys over, or I can import. So I might reuse content, and I can either copy and paste that content or bring in imported content from other files into this object. It's really pretty darn cool in that sense. And it works the same way when I do this online. So, if I'm in the content building interface inside of Moodle, I get the same type of experience. You can add layers of branching questions then. 3 is good. That'll take up plenty of space, right? And so again, I'm just building out this sort of nesting thing. And right? I can manage the whiteboard space. As this gets bigger and bigger, I can keep navigating around. Um, and I can always copy objects. So if I'm going to reuse the same content down a couple of branches, that's fine. Users don't need to know. I can duplicate the content in there. And then this little quick help button gives you some information about how things work. It gives you the option to launch into some step-by-step tutorials. And then there's a preview button in here that you could use, or this thing, right? And I'm going to get an error out of this because it's grumpy in Lumi. So there you go. There's a lot of options and a lot of flexibility inside of what you're building in here. You can reuse content packages that you've already built. So if you built out videos and course presentations already, you can then plop them into here. There is this copy and paste behavior in this tool, which allows you to copy what you've built up and paste it into another one. It's kind of cool. But I don't think it works from Lumi to the H5P interactivity experience. I don't think you could copy on with that button here and paste up there. I think it only works internal to the tool, if that makes sense. So I can copy in Lumi and paste in Lumi, or I could copy online in the activity and paste in the activity online. It's kind of weird, but whatever. It gives you opportunities to create these stages and layers, as well as the branches. It's really pretty cool. I feel like I could play with this for like another week at any point when I happen to have a free week of time, I suppose, to really get the hang of it all. But there's a lot of possibility and a very rich set of content that's available in there. And that gives you, I think, an incredible amount of flexibility in building out complex compound experiences for learners. You can really build rich, deep lessons and modules within the course. It's also an awful lot to bring to bear. So, you know, I don't really see this being a tool that you're going to use all the time, but especially if you're thinking about training materials for people, branching could be really quite useful for those training materials where you ask people either what their function is and address them based on that layer, or what they need or are interested in learning about today and send them down those layers. My other thought on branching is that I don't know if you're familiar with this option, but oh gosh, let's just go make some trouble. When I go to create a course, right, there's all kinds of different formats for courses, but there's this single activity format, which allows you to create a course out of a single activity, right? So the whole course is just that activity. And you could choose interactive content as the activity type that the course is. So rather than having course pages and a menu and a dashboard and all that jazz that goes on, you really just get the activity with the dashboard space. That's it. And so there's not an announcement form or anything else. But what's kind of cool is that it's it's focused on a single activity. But you could build a branching activity package inside of HP and then make it a single course and have a rich experience full of lots of paths and information to explore for users while just keeping it focused on being that single activity type. So that was kind of one of the things that I thought about when I first started looking at the branching activity type, was thinking, because my most common use for a single activity format is the lesson module, which I think those two objects kind of parallel each other pretty closely. I would say overall, as much as I love the lesson module, the branching activity inside of H5P is a whole lot easier to build content in than the lesson module. So, you know, you should still love the lesson module, but you might love this also. So we'll just put it that way. And if you've got training courses or training content that you're thinking about building for your learners, think about taking the approach of building that content in a branching scenario space. All right. We're winding down. Question sets, basically a quiz, but not a quiz. I think of them as form of assessments. I would. Hey, I'm back. Sorry, something just crashed. So question sets allow you to build a series of questions that are not the same type of question, as opposed to when I build a question and then I can build multiple versions of or multiple questions of the same type in a sequence. It's a subtle difference. It's kind of handy, but I don't think it's the most amazing thing in the world. And there are some disadvantages to using it, such as losing out on some of the analytics around questions inside of Moodle. It certainly has a place. I think of it as a kind of compound tool that I would actually use inside other things, as opposed to a standalone test or an assessment. I wanted to give an assignment here. I'm trying to think of a scenario explanation, but I decided that I felt like the scenario was too restrictive. So I thought maybe I would just cut to it and say, take some kind of training video or training document that you've got, or steal one from us. That's fine. It's not really stealing. They're there for you. Please borrow one of ours. If you don't have one handy that you're thinking about in your mind, take one of those training objects and turn it into something that's interactive. Short video, slide deck, or some kind of PDF. You can download our help documents as text files, or you can just copy and paste like help doc information into a Word doc or directly into an H5P element. Or grab one of those YouTube videos from our channel up on YouTube, OpenLMS, pretty easy to find. Whatever feels comfy and cozy for you. Grab one of those objects, make some kind of content type out of it. I mean, you could go directly to branching, but keep in mind, like the elements inside of branching are, course presentations and interactive videos. So you're sort of stepping all the way off the edge of the cliff, but but it's also really cool, so that's okay. Or roll it all the way back and just make an interactive course presentation, right? Make a slide set out of some of that information. You could use a combination, right? You could go in and grab the text from our help docs about forum posts and grab one of the videos about forums and put it inside the slides for the presentation of the text. But experiment with building one of those objects. If you want to be super ambitious, build two of those objects and then build a branching activity where each of those objects is the end result of a branch, because you've gone in for all of the super fun. Whatever you feel comfortable with on that, and then just turn in the explanation of what you did with maybe a little screenshot to explain you know how it went is mostly what I'm interested in. Less so in the what did you actually put down for words on the thing. So don't feel constrained by the content, feel constrained by the experiment of doing things. um, I'm super excited for that, Pam. That sounds really cool. Yeah, I mean the possibilities are almost endless with what you can do here, which is maybe the downside as well as the upside. Is that there's so much possible and so little time to do it all. Thank you very much for joining. We're right at the end of our time slot here, and I want to tell you that I've appreciated your time and your feedback and comments inside the conversation, as well as the stuff that folks have already turned in. There were some really good examples that came through, and I really appreciate you taking some time to test this stuff out. Feel free to ask some more questions. I appreciate. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and hope you have a great day. And Dan, I'm going to read through this question real quick. But yeah, we might take that offline too. Thank you very much. I'm going to pause the recording now. Do, 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 do. Right. So you know what? It doesn't feed that in when you do those embeds, they don't feed back to the gradebook and they don't feed back to the hidden activity. They don't really track terribly well. Um, but there's an option to feed the XAPI data into the XAPI log stores, as well as look at the activity grade reports. You can have them count for 0 points, but it's still going to show up to the gradebook, which is kind of weird. But you can hide it, and then it just takes it out of the gradebook for everybody except those of us that can see it. Yeah. So for me, if I want to track data about how people are using it, I try to make it an activity, even if it's an activity that doesn't count. Um, but the embed potentially, with some future development work, will be feeding into its own report data as well, in a better way. So there's kind of hope on the horizon for the way that data is going to come through a little cleaner. Because I mean, the system's tracking who's clicking on what anyway. I mean, it's in there. It's just not saving that data. If you're using an XAPI log store in the system, and the XAPI log store connecting out to an LRS, which is the reporting engine for a XAPI activity, that could give you the insight into how people are interacting with those embedded content objects, because they should still stream to the XAPI log store through the event triggers, and then the log store should stream that data to the reporting engine like Watershed, that you can then see the reports on activity in those resources. Hopefully that's a decent answer. I appreciate your time and the great questions. So thanks. Right on, Dan. Have a great day, my friend. Don't float away.